The telegram arrived at the ranch on a blistering afternoon in July of 1882. And when Garrett Harrison read the words written there, his weathered hands trembled slightly as he realized his lonely bachelor existence in Lead, South Dakota, was about to change forever. He had written to the matrimonial agency 6 months prior, desperate for companionship after 10 years of working his cattle ranch alone. And now the response informed him that his bride would arrive on the evening train. But there was something the agency had failed to mention in their earlier correspondence. She was bringing 3 children with her. Garrett read the telegram 3 times, his heart pounding in his chest, then looked around at the modest ranch house he had built with his own 2 hands. The place was small but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that opened into a sitting area. He had always imagined filling it with the laughter of children someday, but he had expected to start from the beginning, not inherit a ready-made family. The sun hung low in the sky as Garrett rode his horse into town, his mind racing with questions and concerns. What if the children did not like him? What if he was not cut out to be a father to someone else's offspring? But then another thought struck him, warmer and more hopeful than the others. Perhaps this was exactly what he had been praying for all these years. A full house. A real family. The loneliness that had eaten at him since his own parents passed away might finally be banished by the sound of children's voices echoing through the rooms. The train station was nearly empty when Garrett arrived, tying his horse to the post outside and straightening his best shirt nervously. He had worn his cleanest clothes and even trimmed his dark beard that morning, though his reflection in the water trough had shown him to be exactly what he was. A 32-year-old rancher with sun-creased eyes and calloused hands, built strong from hard work, but lacking the refinement of city gentlemen. Would she be disappointed? The train whistle cut through the evening air, and Garrett's heart hammered against his ribs as the locomotive pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam. Passengers began disembarking, and then he saw her. She was standing on the platform steps, one hand gripping a worn carpetbag and the other holding onto a little girl who could not have been more than 4 years old. Behind them, a boy of perhaps 8 and another girl around 10 climbed down carefully, their faces smudged with travel dust. Catherine Lewis looked exhausted. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical bun, wisps escaping around her face, and her simple blue traveling dress was creased from the long journey. But when her eyes met Garrett's across the platform, he saw something there that made his breath catch. Strength, determination, and perhaps a flicker of the same hope that burned in his own chest. He walked forward, removing his hat. "Miss Lewis, I am Garrett Harrison." She studied him for a long moment, her green eyes assessing, and then she nodded slowly. "Mr. Harrison, I apologize for the surprise. The agency assured me they would inform you about my situation." "They sent a telegram today," Garrett said, his voice gentler than he had intended. He looked down at the 3 children clustered around their mother like chicks around a hen. "But I want you to know something right away. I always wanted a full house." Catherine's expression shifted, surprise and relief washing across her features. The little girl peeked out from behind her mother's skirt, curious brown eyes examining Garrett carefully. He crouched down to be at eye level with the children, his hat dangling from one hand. "What are your names?" he asked softly. The oldest girl lifted her chin, protective. "I am Rosemary. This is my brother Thomas, and that is our little sister Margaret." "Those are fine names," Garrett said seriously. "I am pleased to meet all of you. I have a ranch about 5 miles from here with horses and cattle. Do you like animals?" Thomas spoke for the first time, his voice eager despite his obvious wariness. "I like horses." I saw one up close once in Chicago. Chicago, Garrett straightened, looking at Catherine with new understanding. She had come all the way from Illinois, traveling across half the country with 3 small children. The courage that must have required made his chest tighten with admiration. "My husband died 2 years ago," Catherine said quietly, clearly wanting to establish the facts before they went any further. "Factory accident. I tried to make it work, but the city was eating us alive. The agency promised a fresh start, and I was honest about the children in my letters." "I thought you knew." Garrett noticed the way her jaw tightened when she spoke about her late husband, the grief that still lived in the corners of her eyes. She had been through hell, and had somehow kept herself and her children together through it all. He made a decision in that moment, one that felt as right as anything he had ever done. "Come on then," he said, gesturing toward where his horse waited. "We will need to rent a wagon from the livery to get everyone home. I hope you do not mind, but supper will be simple tonight." "I am a fair cook, but I was not expecting company until tomorrow." Catherine's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Mr. Harrison, you have no idea how good even a simple meal sounds after trained food." The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours in the rented wagon, with Garrett's horse tied to the back. The children sat in the wagon bed, bundled in blankets Garrett had borrowed from the livery, while Catherine sat on the bench beside him. The South Dakota prairie stretched out around them in the fading light, vast and empty and beautiful in its starkness. "It is so quiet," Catherine murmured, and Garrett could not tell if she meant it as a complaint or an observation. "That bothers some folks," he admitted. "The silence, but I have always found it peaceful." "I think I will too," she said after a moment. "After Chicago, where you could never escape the noise of factories and people and chaos, this feels like I can finally breathe." They talked quietly as the wagon rolled along, carefully feeling out the boundaries of this strange new relationship. Catherine told him about her life before, how she had married young to a man who worked in the steel mills, how they had been happy enough until the accident that left her widowed at 28 with 3 mouths to feed. She had worked as a laundress and a seamstress, but the wages were barely enough to keep them in their tiny tenement room. "I was not looking for romance," she admitted as the ranch house came into view in the moonlight. "I was looking for survival, for my children. I want to be honest about that." Garrett pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, setting the brake. "I appreciate honesty, and I will be honest too. I am lonely. I want a family. Maybe we start there and see what else grows." The children were asleep in the back, exhausted from their journey. Garrett carefully lifted Margaret first, the little girl barely stirring as he carried her inside and laid her on his own bed. Thomas and Rosemary followed, drowsy and compliant, and Catherine tucked all 3 of them in together under the quilts. "They can have the bedroom," Garrett said quietly. "You can have the other one. I will sleep out here on the floor until we figure out better arrangements." Catherine turned to face him in the dim lamplight of the main room. "We should marry quickly." "I know that is the arrangement, but I want to make sure you still want to go through with it, now that you know what you are getting." "I told you already," Garrett said firmly. "I always wanted a full house. Let us get the license tomorrow and have the preacher come out this week." "Unless you need more time." "Time is a luxury I cannot afford, Mr. Harrison," Catherine replied, but her expression had softened. "But I am grateful for your kindness to the children. That means more to me than you can know." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, 2 strangers about to bind their lives together, and then Garrett cleared his throat. "You must be starving. Let me heat up some stew." The kitchen was small but functional, and Catherine watched as Garrett moved around the space with easy familiarity, stoking the fire in the stove and pulling out a pot of beef stew he had made the day before. As it warmed, he sliced bread and set the table, and Catherine found herself relaxing slightly. He was not what she had expected. She had imagined someone rougher, perhaps even cruel. Instead, she saw a man who was gentle with her sleeping children and thoughtful enough to give her his own room without a second thought. They ate in comfortable silence, both too tired for much conversation. When Catherine finally excused herself to the bedroom, Garrett laid out blankets on the floor near the fireplace and stared up at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people breathing in his house. It felt right. It felt like the beginning of something good. Morning came early on a ranch, and Garrett was up before dawn as usual, trying to be quiet as he started coffee and began preparing breakfast. He was surprised when Catherine emerged from the bedroom fully dressed, her hair already pinned up neatly. "You are up early," he said. "Farm hours," she replied with a small smile. "My parents had a small farm before I married. I am used to early mornings. I thought perhaps I could help." They worked together in the kitchen, and Garrett found himself stealing glances at her as she moved around the space. In the morning light streaming through the window, he could see that she was pretty, though care and worry had left their marks on her face. She had a capable way about her, efficient but not cold, and when the children tumbled out of the bedroom rubbing sleep from their eyes, her entire demeanor softened with love. Breakfast was eggs and bacon and fresh bread, and Thomas ate like he had not seen food in days. Rosemary was more reserved, her watchful eyes moving between Garrett and her mother as if trying to figure out whether this situation was truly safe. Little Margaret seemed less concerned, chattering away about the horses she had seen tied up outside. "Can I see them? Can I touch them?" "Are they nice horses?" she asked, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. "After breakfast," Garrett promised. "I will introduce you to all of them, but you have to be gentle and quiet because horses startle easily." After the meal, Garrett led the children outside while Catherine began washing the dishes. The morning air was crisp and clean, and the sun was just beginning to warm the earth. Garrett showed them the barn first, introducing them to his 3 horses. His riding horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Buck, his workhorse, a massive draft horse called Sam, and a gentle mare he had purchased last year named Daisy. Margaret was fearless, reaching up to pat Daisy's nose with her tiny hand, while Thomas hung back slightly, clearly wanting to be brave but uncertain. Rosemary stood with her arms crossed, maintaining her protective distance. "Your mother said you wanted to learn about horses," Garrett said to Thomas, keeping his voice casual. "If you are interested, I could teach you to ride, and how to care for them. A good horseman is always valuable out here." Thomas's eyes lit up, though he tried to hide his enthusiasm. "Really?" "Really," Garrett confirmed. "But it is hard work. Horses need feeding and grooming and attention every day. Think you can handle that?" "Yes, sir," Thomas said immediately, standing straighter. Rosemary spoke up then, her voice challenging. "What about us? Do girls not get to learn?" Garrett turned to her with a slight smile. "Out here, everyone needs to know how to ride. Man or woman, boy or girl. The prairie does not care about your gender when you need to get somewhere. If you want to learn, I will teach you too." Something in Rosemary's defensive posture eased slightly. "All right then." They spent the morning exploring the ranch, Garrett showing the children the chicken coop where he kept a dozen laying hens, the vegetable garden that needed tending, and the pasture where his small herd of cattle grazed. Catherine joined them after finishing the kitchen work, and Garrett noticed the way she breathed deeply, her face turned toward the sun. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. "It can be hard too," Garrett warned. "Winters are brutal, summers can be scorching, and it is isolated. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away." Still better than Chicago, Catherine replied with certainty. They rode into Lead that afternoon to visit the courthouse and begin the process of obtaining a marriage license. The town was small but bustling, built around the gold mining operations that had sprung up in the Black Hills. Catherine kept the children close as they walked down the main street, passing saloons and general stores and the assay office where miners brought their findings to be weighed and valued. The clerk at the courthouse was a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson who looked at Catherine's 3 children with raised eyebrows, but processed their paperwork efficiently. "Preacher Wilson can perform the ceremony," she said. "He does house calls for a small fee if you would rather marry at your ranch." "That would be preferable," Garrett said, glancing at Catherine for confirmation. She nodded, and he continued, "Could he come this Saturday?" "I will send word to him," Mrs. Patterson promised. They stopped at the general store on the way out of town, and Garrett insisted on buying fabric for new dresses for the girls and shirts for Thomas. Catherine protested at first, but Garrett was firm. "They are about to become my children too," he said quietly, in a voice low enough that the youngsters examining the candy jars nearby could not hear. "Let me provide for them. It is what I want to do." Catherine's eyes grew suspiciously bright, and she nodded, turning away to compose herself. When she turned back, she was smiling. "Thank you, Garrett. You do not know what this means." That evening, after the children were asleep, Garrett and Catherine sat outside on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast prairie sky. The night air was cool and pleasant, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. "Are you afraid?" Garrett asked suddenly. "Of marrying a stranger?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "I am more afraid of what would have happened if I had stayed in Chicago. At least here I have hope." "And you have been kind. That is more than many women in my situation can say." "I will try to be a good husband," Garrett said, "and a good father to Rosemary, Thomas, and Margaret. I cannot promise I will not make mistakes, but I promise I will always try." "That is all any of us can do," Catherine replied. They sat in companionable silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts about the future that was rushing toward them. Garrett found himself stealing glances at Catherine's profile in the starlight, noticing the elegant line of her neck and the way her hands rested calmly in her lap. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was strong. She had survived tragedy and kept her family together through sheer determination. He felt a spark of something in his chest, not quite love yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Catherine threw herself into making the house a home, cleaning and organizing with an energy that surprised Garrett. She found curtains in one of his storage trunks, left behind by his mother, and hung them in the windows. She planted herbs in the kitchen garden and showed the children how to gather eggs from the chickens without frightening the birds. Rosemary slowly began to thaw, especially after Garrett kept his promise and began teaching her to ride. She was a natural, fearless, and quick to learn, and Garrett found himself impressed by her determination. Thomas followed his sister's lead, though he was more cautious, taking his time to build confidence with the horses. Margaret was still too small to ride alone, but Garrett would lift her onto Buck's back and lead the horse around the yard, delighting in her peals of laughter. Catherine watched these interactions from the porch, her heart doing strange things in her chest. She had not expected this. She had expected, at best, grudging tolerance of her children. Instead, Garrett seemed to genuinely enjoy their company, patiently answering Thomas's endless questions about ranching and gently correcting Margaret when she got too rough with the barn cats. Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Preacher Wilson, an elderly man with kind eyes and a shock of white hair, arrived at noon in his wagon. He set up in the main room of the house, and Garrett and Catherine stood before him with the 3 children as witnesses. Catherine wore a simple green dress she had made from the fabric Garrett bought, and she had woven wildflowers into her hair. Garrett wore his best suit, the one he had worn to his parents' funerals years ago, and he held Catherine's hands gently as they spoke their vows. "Do you, Garrett James Harrison, take Catherine Marie Lewis to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Garrett said clearly, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. "And do you, Catherine Marie Lewis, take Garrett James Harrison to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Catherine's voice was steady when she answered, "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Dakota, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Garrett hesitated for just a moment, then leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to Catherine's lips. It was brief and respectful, but Catherine felt a flutter in her stomach that took her by surprise. When they pulled apart, Garrett was smiling, and she found herself smiling back. Preacher Wilson stayed for a simple lunch, then departed with his fee and his blessings. As his wagon disappeared down the road, Catherine felt the weight of reality settling over her. She was married again, to a man she barely knew. But when she looked at Garrett playing with Margaret in the yard, tossing her gently in the air and catching her while she shrieked with glee, she felt that flutter again. Maybe this would be all right. Maybe it would be more than all right. That night, after the children were asleep, Garrett and Catherine faced the awkwardness of their sleeping arrangements. They were married now, which meant expectations had shifted, but neither seemed quite ready to rush into intimacy. "I can still sleep out here," Garrett offered. "If you need more time." Catherine looked at him, this man who had been nothing but patient and kind, and made a decision. "We are married now. You should not have to sleep on the floor in your own home. We can share the room. I trust you to be a gentleman." They prepared for bed in shy silence, changing in separate rooms before meeting in the bedroom that had been Garrett's alone for 10 years. The bed was large enough that they could maintain a respectful distance, and they lay there in the darkness, acutely aware of each other's presence. "Catherine," Garrett's voice broke the silence. "Yes, thank you for giving me a chance, for giving this life a chance." Catherine rolled onto her side to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. "Thank you for wanting us, all of us. You did not have to take on 3 children, but you did not hesitate." "I meant what I said," Garrett replied softly. "I always wanted a full house. This feels right." They talked quietly into the night, sharing more about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Catherine told him about her first marriage, how young and naive she had been, how her husband had been a good man but worn down by the brutal factory work. Garrett told her about his parents, who had homesteaded this land when he was just a boy, how he had watched them build everything from nothing only to lose them both to influenza within a week of each other 5 years ago. "I have been so lonely," Garrett admitted. "I did not realize how much until you all arrived. The silence I thought was peaceful was really just empty." Catherine reached across the space between them and found his hand. "We will fill it with noise, I promise you that. 3 children are never quiet for long." Garrett squeezed her hand gently, and they fell asleep like that, fingers intertwined, not quite lovers yet but no longer strangers. The weeks that followed established new rhythms and routines. Catherine proved to be an excellent cook and manager, stretching Garrett's supplies further than he ever had and planting additional vegetables to help feed their growing household. She also turned out to be quite good with the cattle, unafraid of the large animals and quick to learn the basics of ranching. Rosemary had begun to smile more, her defensive walls crumbling as she realized that Garrett was not going to disappear or turn cruel. She followed him around the ranch when her chores were done, asking questions about everything from how to mend a fence to why the cattle needed to be moved to different pastures. Garrett answered every question patiently, pleased by her sharp mind. Thomas had bonded with Garrett over the horses, and the boy spent every spare moment in the barn, grooming and caring for the animals with a dedication that impressed his new stepfather. Garrett began teaching him to rope and ride properly, skills that would serve the boy well in this life. Even little Margaret had blossomed, losing the pinched, hungry look she had arrived with and filling out into a healthy, rosy-cheeked child who followed her mother everywhere and chattered constantly about the ranch animals she had claimed as her personal friends. One evening in late August, nearly 6 weeks after the wedding, Garrett came in from checking the cattle to find Catherine alone in the kitchen. The children were already asleep, worn out from a day of helping with the harvest from the vegetable garden. "They are good children," Garrett said, washing his hands at the basin. "You have raised them well." Catherine looked up from the bread dough she was kneading for tomorrow's breakfast. "They have been through so much. I worried they would never trust anyone again, but you have been patient with them. You have given them something I could not, a father figure, security." Garrett dried his hands and moved closer, leaning against the kitchen counter. "And what about you, Catherine? What have I given you?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Catherine stopped kneading and turned to face him fully. "Hope," she said quietly, "and something I did not expect, the beginning of happiness." Garrett reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his work-roughened fingers surprisingly gentle. "Only the beginning," Catherine's breath caught. Over the past weeks, she had found herself increasingly aware of Garrett, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the deep rumble of his laugh, the gentle patience he showed her children, the respectful distance he maintained even as they shared a bed each night. She had married him for practical reasons, for survival, but something had shifted. Something had grown. "Maybe more than the beginning," she whispered. Garrett cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks gently. "I need you to know something. This started as a practical arrangement, but it has become something else for me. I care about you, Catherine, deeply. I think I am falling in love with you." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I think I am falling in love with you too. I did not think I could feel this way again, but you make me feel safe. You make me feel cherished." When Garrett kissed her this time, it was not the chaste peck from their wedding day. It was deeper, more passionate, filled with weeks of growing affection and desire. Catherine melted into him, her flower-covered hands clutching his shirt, and when they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. "The bread dough," Catherine said breathlessly. Glancing at the forgotten lump on the counter, Garrett laughed, the sound joyful and free. "Let it rise. I have something more important to attend to." He kissed her again, and Catherine felt something inside her finally unlock, a door she had closed after her first husband's death finally opening again. This was different from her first marriage. That had been young love, sweet but shallow. This was deeper, built on mutual respect and shared burdens and the daily choice to care for each other. They made love that night for the first time, gentle and tender in the darkness of their bedroom. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Catherine traced patterns on Garrett's chest. "I was so scared when I got on that train," she admitted. "I thought I was making a terrible mistake, but this is the best decision I ever made." Garrett pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I thought I would be alone forever. I thought I had missed my chance at family. And then you stepped off that train with 3 children and a carpet bag, and my whole world changed. As autumn painted the prairie in golds and reds, the Harrison family settled deeper into their life together. Garrett began teaching the children to read from his mother's old books, gathered around the fireplace in the evenings. Catherine made winter clothes for everyone, her needle flying as she prepared them for the harsh season ahead. One afternoon in early October, a wagon appeared on the horizon and Garrett rode out to meet it. Catherine watched from the porch, one hand shading her eyes as Garrett spoke with the newcomers. When he returned, he had news. "Neighbors," he explained. "The Johnsons from 3 miles east. They heard I had gotten married and wanted to come calling. I invited them for supper tomorrow. I hope that is all right." Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness. What if they do not approve? Of the mail order arrangement or the children? Garrett took her hands firmly. "Then they can keep their opinions to themselves. You are my wife, and those are our children. Anyone who cannot respect that is not welcome here." The Johnsons turned out to be a pleasant couple in their 50s whose own children had grown and moved away. Mrs. Johnson, a plump woman with rosy cheeks and a warm smile, took an immediate liking to Catherine. "It is so nice to have another woman nearby," she exclaimed, settling into a chair at the kitchen table while the men talked ranching outside. "It gets lonely out here with no female company. You must come visit me and bring the children. I have so many of my daughter's old clothes packed away. No sense in them going to waste." As the evening wore on, Catherine felt herself relaxing. The Johnsons were kind people who treated her children with warmth and showed no judgment about her circumstances. When they left, promising to return the visit soon, Catherine felt like she had made real friends. "See," Garrett said that night as they prepared for bed, "I told you it would be fine." "You were right," Catherine admitted, unfastening her hair and letting it fall around her shoulders. Garrett watched her with open admiration, and she felt a flush of pleasure at his attention. "This is becoming home." "It is home," Garrett corrected, pulling her into his arms. "You made it home." The first snow came in late November, transforming the prairie into a white wonderland. The children had never seen so much snow, Chicago's urban environment being vastly different from the wide, open spaces of South Dakota. Garrett took them out to build snowmen and have snowball fights, his laughter mixing with theirs as they played. Catherine watched from the window, her hand resting on her stomach. She had not told Garrett yet, wanting to be absolutely certain, but she was fairly sure she was pregnant. The signs were there, familiar from her previous pregnancies. She felt a mix of joy and trepidation. They were still adjusting to their blended family, and now there would be a baby. That evening, after the children were in bed and she and Garrett were alone, Catherine gathered her courage. "Garrett, I need to tell you something." He looked up from the saddle he was mending, his expression immediately concerned. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," Catherine assured him quickly. "Better than fine, actually. I think I am with child." Garrett's hand stilled on the leather, his eyes widening. "Truly?" "Fairly certain, yes. It is early yet, but all the signs are there." Garrett set aside the saddle and crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulling Catherine into his arms and spinning her around. "That is wonderful news." "A baby, our baby," Catherine laughed, relieved by his enthusiasm. "You are happy then?" "Happy, Catherine, I am overjoyed." Garrett set her down gently, his hands moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "A baby. Good Lord, we are going to need to add on to the house." Over the winter months, Garrett began planning the expansion, sketching out designs for 2 more bedrooms to be added in the spring. The children were excited about the baby, especially Margaret, who was thrilled at the prospect of no longer being the youngest. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" Margaret asked constantly, and Catherine could only laugh and tell her they would have to wait and see. Christmas came, and Garrett cut down a small pine tree that they decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments the children made. It was a modest celebration, but filled with warmth and love. Garrett had carved wooden toys for the children, a horse for Thomas, a doll for Margaret, and a beautiful jewelry box for Rosemary. For Catherine, he had somehow acquired a locket with space for photographs inside. "For our family," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "so you can always keep us close to your heart." Catherine's gift to him was more practical but no less meaningful. She had made him a new winter coat, lined with fur and stitched with careful attention to detail. When he put it on, it fit perfectly, and his eyes grew suspiciously bright. "Thank you," he said simply, but Catherine understood all the emotion packed into those two words. That night, lying in bed with Garrett's hand resting protectively on her growing belly, Catherine reflected on how much her life had changed in 6 months. She had arrived here desperate and frightened, clinging to her children and hoping for the bare minimum of kindness. Instead, she had found love. Real, deep, abiding love. Not just romantic love, though that had blossomed beyond her wildest expectations, but the love of family. The love of home. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked sleepily, his fingers tracing gentle circles on her stomach. "How lucky I am," Catherine replied. "How lucky we all are." "I am the lucky one," Garrett countered. "You brought life back to this place. You brought life back to me." Winter deepened, and the ranch became a cozy fortress against the cold. The cattle huddled in the barn and near the windbreaks Garrett had constructed, and the chickens stayed in their coop, still laying eggs despite the frigid temperatures. Inside the house, the family thrived. Rosemary had become Garrett's shadow, absorbing everything he could teach her about ranching. She had a natural aptitude for it, and Garrett had confided in Catherine that he thought she would make an excellent rancher in her own right someday. Thomas had grown inches, it seemed, shooting up and filling out with regular meals and hard work. His initial shyness had been replaced with growing confidence, and he spoke of one day having his own ranch. Margaret remained the baby of the family for now, though she was already asserting that she would be a very helpful big sister when the time came. She followed Catherine around, mimicking her chores and chattering endlessly about everything and nothing. In February, during a particularly brutal blizzard, Catherine went into labor. Garrett sent Thomas riding to fetch Mrs. Johnson, who had agreed to help with the delivery, while Rosemary kept Margaret distracted in the children's bedroom. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the house, but inside, a different kind of storm was taking place. The labor was long and difficult, harder than Catherine remembered her previous births being. Mrs. Johnson stayed calm, directing Garrett to boil water and bring clean linens, her capable hands helping Catherine through each contraction. Garrett stayed by Catherine's side, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement even as his face paled at her obvious pain. Finally, as dawn broke and the storm began to ease, the baby arrived. A strong, healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced his displeasure at being born into such a cold world. "A son," Mrs. Johnson announced, wrapping the baby in warmed blankets. "Congratulations." Garrett stared at the tiny person in his arms with absolute wonder. His son. His and Catherine's together. The baby had Catherine's nose and what might become Garrett's dark coloring, and he was absolutely perfect. "What should we name him?" Garrett asked, unable to take his eyes off the infant. Catherine, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at them. "What about James? After your father?" Garrett's eyes filled with tears. His father had died before ever meeting grandchildren, before ever seeing what Garrett had built on the land they had homesteaded together. James Harrison, that is perfect. The children were allowed in to meet their new brother, and each reacted in their own way. Rosemary was practical and curious, asking questions about how to care for an infant. Thomas was quiet but clearly pleased to have a brother. Margaret was enchanted, declaring baby James to be her very own living doll. As Mrs. Johnson finally prepared to leave, assuring them that mother and baby were both healthy, she pulled Garrett aside. "You have built something special here, young man. A real family. Your parents would be proud." After she left, Garrett sat beside the bed where Catherine dozed with baby James in her arms. The house was quiet except for the occasional crackle from the fireplace and the soft sounds of the baby. Garrett thought about how empty this place had been just a year ago. How silent, how lonely. Now it was filled with life and noise and love. 5 children total, counting the 3 who had come with Catherine. A full house, just as he had always wanted. Spring arrived slowly, winter reluctant to release its grip on the prairie. But eventually, the snow melted, revealing new grass underneath, and the cattle could return to grazing in the pastures. Garrett began work on the house expansion, and Thomas proved to be a capable assistant, learning carpentry alongside ranching. Catherine had recovered well from the birth, and she moved through her days with baby James strapped to her chest in a sling, leaving her hands free for her other work. She had never been happier. The fear and desperation that had driven her to become a mail-order bride seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than a year. One warm afternoon in April, Catherine was hanging laundry on the line while the children played nearby, and James napped in a basket in the shade. Garrett came riding in from checking the cattle, and something about the way he sat his horse, the confidence and capability he exuded, made Catherine's heart skip a beat. He had become so dear to her. She loved the way he always put the children first, the way he kissed her forehead every morning before heading out to work, the way he held baby James with such tender care despite his large, rough hands. She loved his laugh, his steadiness, his quiet strength. Garrett dismounted and walked over to her, pulling her into his arms despite the fact that her hands were still damp from the washing. "I love you," he said simply, as if he could read her thoughts. "I love you too," Catherine replied, rising on her toes to kiss him properly. "Mama and Papa are kissing again," Margaret announced loudly, and the other children giggled. Garrett laughed but did not release Catherine. "Get used to it," he called to the children. "I plan to be kissing your mama for the next 50 years at least." The expansion to the house was completed by midsummer, adding much-needed space for their growing family. Each of the girls now had their own small bedroom, while Thomas and James would share the larger room, though James still slept in a cradle in his parents' room for now. The ranch was prospering too. The cattle had multiplied, and Garrett had been able to sell several head at good prices. He had also acquired another horse, a young mare he was training, with the intention of eventually teaching Margaret to ride properly. On their first anniversary, Garrett surprised Catherine with a trip into Lade, just the 2 of them, leaving the children in the capable care of Mrs. Johnson for the afternoon. They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, a luxury Catherine had not experienced in years, and Garrett bought her a beautiful shawl from the general store. "This year has been the best of my life," Garrett told her as they sat together in the hotel lobby, watching people pass by on the street outside. "Every day I wake up grateful that you answered my letter, grateful that you took a chance on a lonely rancher in South Dakota." Catherine squeezed his hand. "I am the one who should be grateful. You saved us, Garrett, not just from poverty but from a life without joy." You gave my children a home and a father. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again." "We saved each other," Garrett corrected, "and we built something beautiful together." As they rode home in the late afternoon sun, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The grief of losing her first husband, the desperation of trying to survive in the city, the terrifying leap of faith that led her to board a train west with 3 children and no guarantee of what awaited her. She had expected, at best, a roof over their heads and food on the table. She had found so much more. She had found home. She had found family. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a man who looked at her ready-made family and said he had always wanted a full house. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters that tested their endurance, summers with too little rain that made ranching difficult, and the usual illnesses and accidents that were part of frontier life. But through it all, the Harrison family remained strong, bound together by love and commitment. Rosemary grew into a capable young woman, eventually marrying a neighboring rancher's son when she was 22 and starting her own ranch with Garrett's help. Thomas became his father's right hand on the ranch, invaluable for his knowledge and work ethic. When he was 25, he married a schoolteacher from Lead, and they built a house on the far corner of Garrett's land, expanding the family ranch. Margaret turned out to be the wild one, insisting on learning to break horses and rope cattle as well as any man. She eventually left South Dakota to travel, sending letters from San Francisco and Denver and Santa Fe, though she always returned to the ranch for Christmas. James grew up strong and healthy, with his father's love of ranching and his mother's quick mind. He and Catherine remained especially close, the baby who had been born into their love rather than coming with her. Garrett and Catherine had 2 more children, a daughter named Elizabeth when James was 3, and another son named William 2 years after that. The house was always full of noise and activity, exactly as Garrett had dreamed. On a warm evening in June of 1902, 20 years after Catherine had first stepped off the train in Lead, Garrett and Catherine sat on the porch watching the sunset. Their hair had gray in it now, and their faces showed the lines earned by 2 decades of hard work and laughter. But their love had only deepened with time, maturing into something solid and unshakable. "You ever regret it?" Garrett asked, his arm around Catherine's shoulders. "Taking a chance on a stranger's letter." Catherine leaned into him, watching their youngest children playing in the yard. Elizabeth was 16 now, beautiful and clever, helping her mother manage the increasingly large household. William was 14, already as tall as his father and equally devoted to the ranch. "Not for a single moment," Catherine said firmly. "This life, this family, this love, it is everything I never knew I needed." Garrett kissed her temple, his heart full. "I always wanted a full house," he said, echoing the words he had spoken on that first day so long ago. "But what I got was so much more. I got a home, I got love, I got everything." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the prairie sky in shades of orange and pink, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought them here. The fear and desperation that had pushed her onto that train. The courage it had taken to travel across the country with 3 children. The leap of faith required to marry a stranger. But most of all, she thought about the moment when Garrett had looked at her and her 3 children and said without hesitation that he had always wanted a full house. In that moment, she had not known it yet, but her life had been about to change forever. She had been about to find not just security or survival, but genuine happiness and deep, abiding love. The screen door creaked as Thomas and his wife arrived for supper, their 2 young children running ahead to greet their grandparents. Rosemary and her husband would arrive soon too, bringing their 3 children. The house would be full tonight, bursting with family and laughter and life. Garrett stood and helped Catherine to her feet, and together they went inside to join their family. The kitchen was warm and bright, the table already being set by Elizabeth while William brought in firewood and the grandchildren played underfoot. This was what they had built together. Not just a ranch or a house, but a legacy. A family that had started with a desperate woman, 3 frightened children, and a lonely cowboy who believed in taking chances on love. From that unlikely beginning, they had created something lasting and beautiful. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was finally quiet, Garrett and Catherine prepared for bed with the comfortable ease of 2 decades of marriage. As they lay down together, Catherine traced the familiar lines of Garrett's face with her fingers. "I love you," she whispered. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Garrett replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for filling my house, for filling my life, for being the answer to every prayer I ever spoke." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done for 20 years, their love story a testament to the power of hope, courage, and the willingness to take a chance on happiness, even when the odds seemed impossible. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its mate. The Harrison ranch was quiet now, but it was a good quiet. Not empty or lonely, but peaceful. The quiet of a home filled with love, resting before another day of life and work and family. Catherine had come to South Dakota looking for survival, and instead she had found her forever. Garrett had placed an advertisement looking for companionship, and instead he had found his soulmate. Together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone, a family rooted in love and strengthened by shared trials. Their story, like all good love stories, was not just about the romance between 2 people, though that was certainly there and had burned bright for 20 years. It was about the choice to love, day after day, even when things were difficult. It was about building a life together, brick by brick and moment by moment. It was about taking 3 frightened children and a desperate mother and turning them into a family. It was about a lonely cowboy who saw not a burden but a blessing, and said the words that would change all their lives forever. "I always wanted a full house." And full it had been, overflowing with love and laughter, tears and triumphs, ordinary moments and extraordinary memories. Full of life in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Full of family, blood and chosen, bound together by something stronger than genetics. Full of hope for the future and gratitude for the present. As the years continued to pass, Garrett and Catherine would face more challenges and celebrate more joys. They would welcome more grandchildren, eventually great-grandchildren. They would mark anniversaries and mourn losses. They would work side by side through drought and plenty, sickness and health, just as their vows had promised. But through it all, they would have each other and the family they had built together. The family that started when a mail-order bride arrived with 3 children, and a cowboy said the words that would become the foundation of their entire life together. The family that proved love could bloom in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people, when hearts were open and courage was present. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. And in the Harrison house, 5 children slept safely while their parents held each other close, grateful beyond measure for the day they both took a chance on love and found their happily ever after.